There you go. Yeah, he's excited to learn about the method.
I guess he wants to call the meeting. Is it okay now? Okay, we are calling to order the internal training committee, which is the first portion will be the mandatory training for all commissioners. Then we'll dismiss of everyone that's not on this committee, and we'll go into old and new business. And
could you we'll discuss this later, but could you designate the time that we start? Because that's part of our.
Yes, I'll make a motion that we started at 6:11. Yes, okay. Awesome. All in favor, aye, to start the meeting?
We don't need we don't
Oh, we don't have
we
to.
just wanted the timestamp there so we know.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So meeting is called to order at 6:11, and now we'll move into roll call. So for committee members, that is Greg Reeves.
Present.
James Shura.
Present.
Sharina Zayed.
Present.
John Adams.
Present.
And Alana Garrett Ferguson, which is myself. And at this time, we will move into the mandatory training for all commissioners.
We need to call. We don't need to call.
Because we decided.
Mic check, touch. Good. All right, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm well. I'm happy to be with you again.
Are you?
No. But I'm excited to actually be with you in this capacity because this is, part of my main job is to do this, right? And so this is Eat Your Vegetables 101, right? So as newly slated commissioners, you are all now public officials. Right. And so by virtue of being public officials, there are standards just generally outside of the actual business of the commission. There are standards that apply to you just as public employees or public officials. And so a piece of that is ethics. Right. And so when we talk about ethics, though, we're not just talking about what you morally think is right or wrong. That is not the conversation that I want to have with you. For the next 45 minutes to an hour. It's not about that, right? This is about something a little bit deeper than that. But it's about a subset of laws, right? An actual set of laws that apply to you because you are public servants, right? And so that's the conversation that I want to have. And I want to make sure that you're clear on some of the standards and guidelines that now apply to you as public employees. Okay. So if you have questions, please ask them. Obviously, you all know where to find me if you have questions that come up after the fact or other things that come up later. But yeah, so that said, before we jump right in, I want to gauge a little bit. I want to see if let me just do this. Let me ask you a question, right? And so again, safe space, right? No trick questions here. We're amongst friends and the public. But you'll hear more about that later. But let me ask you, right? Generally speaking, if I were to ask you, how many of you consider yourselves to be ethical, right? Just big picture. How many say yes? Okay, good start. You'd be surprised how many times I do this, and that is not a unanimous response.
As much as you can within the systems that we live.
Right. Okay. So for all you ethical commissioners here, how many of you have ever driven more than 25 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone?
Oh, no. Never.
Okay, so now let me ask you this. So for all of you who've done it, right? We've all done it. Follow-up question: how many of you knew it was wrong when you did it and you did it anyway? So you saw the speedometer go and you kept it moving, right? Also, all of us. Let's not even play around, right? Like we've all done it. But my question is, all right. So my question is though, why? Right? What are some of the reasons why you might break the speed limit?
Because everyone else is going way faster than the speed.
Okay, so keeping up with the flow of traffic, right? Keeping up with the flow of traffic, valid reason that people will commonly use for speeding. Or in other words, because everybody else is breaking the law, I better do it too. That's how I'm hearing it, right? Right. But why else? Why else? What are some other reasons? Yeah. Okay, being late, right? Being late, right? You have a special set of circumstances, right? Or how about this? The law is not convenient for what it is you had to do today, right? The law just wasn't convenient, right? We've all been in that situation too, right? Why else?
Maybe we know what the speed limit was in that area.
Ignorance of the law. Ignorance of the law. Have we heard that phrase?
Yes, mine was
Right, and how ignorance of the law is not an excuse, right? But it happens, right? Sometimes you turn onto streets, right, and you haven't seen the sign yet. You don't know, right? Fair. Why else?
Sometimes inattention. Inattention.
Okay, I wasn't paying attention, right? Just wasn't paying attention. Sometimes you just look and oh wait, how did I get there? Right? That absolutely happens. Why else?
Sometimes the road can like the opportunity corridor or something that's like the speed limit isn't really appropriate for.
Okay. So we hear that. What Pete has said is the law is wrong. The law is wrong, right? And we've all had that experience too, right? Going across the shoreway. Does anybody ever do 35 going across that shoreway? They do. But okay. So why else?
Maybe revealing too much. I think I don't know if maybe we know that the officer has some leeway because I think it's when it's below a certain amount, it's like 4 miles, and when it's
okay.
Whatever.
So there's a grace limit.
Right.
How many of us have heard of this grace limit at some point in your lives, right? You might have heard it in different ways. You might have heard 9-year mind, 10-year mind. Maybe that sounds familiar. I once had an officer pull me over once on 90 East. I was headed towards Rocky River, and I was going about 16 miles over the speed limit. He pulled me over. He gave me my ticket, and he was like, "You know what? If you were 15 and under, I would have left you alone. But the fact that you were at 16, sorry, you gotta go." I said, "How convenient is that?" Right? So there's this magical grace limit, i.e., a little bit of breaking the law is okay. Right? That's essentially what we're saying there. And with this magical grace limit that we all have heard, we've all heard this. Has anyone ever seen that written down anywhere?
No.
Was it on anybody's driver's test?
No.
So there's no documentation, but we all know it. How? How? It's something that's become ingrained in culture, right? This is just the way it's always been. That a little bit of breaking the law is okay. Right? It's become something that's become ingrained in culture. I have a couple points, right? All of these reasons why we are saying that we're okay, or we've broken the speed limit laws, right? All these same reasons are exactly the same reasons why anybody commits any crime. For the exact same reasons, because everybody else is doing it, because the law is inconvenient, right? Because I have a special set of circumstances that warrant me engaging in the conduct that I'm engaging in, right? Those emergency situations. I just feel like I have to do it, So all of the crimes that you think you'll never commit, somebody is committing it for the exact same reason that you're willing to break a crime that you did commit, right? So my point is there's not any of us sitting here that's above misconduct. There's not one of us, no matter how ethical you think you are, there's not one of us sitting here or standing that's above engaging in misconduct, right? That's why this is important. That's why it's important to make sure that you understand the guardrails, right? So that, because this conversation is about the slippery slope, right? 26 doesn't seem any harm in that, right? And then you're going 26 and what's 27 and what's 28, what's 29. Maybe you think twice when you get to 30, but in reality, that's still just one more than what you were just doing, right? And then next thing you know, bloop, bloop, and right, and now you're in trouble, right? Because the slippery slope got steep. That's the conversation that I want to have, right? So again, when we talk about, oh, I got a clicker. So when we talk about ethics, again, we're not talking about what we morally think is right or wrong, right? I want to steer very clear of that, right? I'm not here to test your own personal ethics, but an actual standard that applies to you, right? So the ethics law is codified in several places. So here in the city of Cleveland, the ethics law is codified in section 171.38. And also several provisions inside of section 615 of the codified ordinances. Okay. Excuse me. Section 171.38 essentially directs employees and officials to follow the state ethics law, right? Which also, again, applies to all public employees and public officials in the state of Ohio, right? Ohio ethics law you can find in chapter 102 of the Ohio Revised Code, and section 2921.42 and 43 of the Ohio Revised Code, right? The ethics law was created in 1974. Right? And the reason why I'm telling you that, or the reason why that's important to make note of, is what you may find as public officials is there may be and are many policies, practices, procedures that predate 1974, right? That still have influence in terms of how we operate today as a city. Okay. And so what that means is, the reason why that's important to note is that sometimes some of our policies, right, some of our practices did not have the ethics law in mind because the ethics law didn't exist, right? So that's why it's always important to make sure that we're updating policy, that we're updating practices, procedures, right? That we don't fall into that catchphrase that many people like to use, which is, this is the way we've always done it. That has not now, nor has it ever been, an acceptable excuse or reason to do something, right? So this is the ethics law. Just as a side note, I want you to know that when it comes to state ethics law, the arbiters of state ethics law falls with the Ohio Ethics Commission. Okay, so it's a state agency based in Columbus. The agency, they issue advice, or provide advice and guidance to public officials and employees. They also do education, outreach. They administer financial disclosures. So many public officials have to file financial disclosures every year. So they also oversee that process. They also have investigatory authority as well, right? So it's an investigatory body. They have prosecutorial powers as well. So they conduct investigations. They can charge or initiate charges. And then they also work with the General Assembly when it comes to legislation and laws and updates and things like that. Okay, so I want you to know that this exists. My office works hand in hand with the Ethics Commission. So when the mayor created my office in May of last year, it essentially was to be an arm, so to speak, of the Ethics Commission, right? So my role is to provide advice and counsel with respect to the ethics law. To look into issues, not necessarily as an investigative body, but to make sure that issues get addressed, right? So if and when there are concerns about conflicts of interest, things like that, right? I am the person, my office is where you as public officials, where you guys as staff, where anybody in the city can come to get clarity and guidance. Okay, so the areas we're going to talk about briefly are conflicts of interest, interest in public contracts, use of authority and resources, confidentiality, nepotism, gifts, supplemental compensation, and revolving door. Okay, so again, if you have questions, please ask. But again, you know where to find me if you need to ask later, because I actually will leave after this presentation because I got another conflict. So, all right, so let's jump in. But I think before we can get into certain nitty gritties, I want you to understand that when we talk about the ethics law, the crux of it is conflicts of interest, right? That's really what this is about, is how we navigate and deal with conflicts of interest. But to do that, we need to understand what a conflict is, right? And what a conflict of interest is more specifically. So with respect to conflicts, what we're talking about is our relationships, right? Your relationships are what creates conflict for you as a public servant. And so that's family relationships and business relationships. Okay. What I find with specifically with boards and commissions is that you come to the table, right, with a set of conflicts more than what full-time employees would, right? This is even more important for boards and commissions, right? Because you all have jobs, right? You all have other things going on outside of here, right? And so again, your family relationships and your business relationships. So with respect to family, under Ohio ethics law, your family member includes your parents, your grandparents, children of any age, your grandchildren, spouse, siblings. Okay. And this is all regardless of where they live, right? So any of these people related to you are considered to be relatives, right? Now, in addition to that, it also can include aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, in-laws, and anybody else that's related to you by blood or marriage if that person lives with you. Okay, so the distinction here is, let's say you have an aunt, right? They could be like a mother, right? You could be very, very close, but unless that aunt lives with you, she is not considered to be a relative. Okay, that's the distinction that Ohio law makes there. All right, does that make sense? Okay, so if they live with you, it can be aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, in-laws, but regardless of whether they live with you or not, parents, grandparents, children, grandchildren, spouse, siblings, they always are considered to be a relative. Okay. Want to be very, very clear that this is not your best friend that's like a brother, right? I know you've known each other 30, 40 years, right? If it's like, oh yeah, no, nothing, blood couldn't make us closer. Okay, we don't care about that. Okay, at least for the purposes of the ethics law. All right, this is the standard. Yes, question.
Does that, do we substitute like a partner where spouse is, to somebody you live with?
So good question. The state ethics law has not quite caught up with where we are in 2021 society, right? Our city code or our city policies have, right, and can include that. But I want to make sure I give you guys the floor, right? So that because my goal again is to iterate that the ethics law is the floor, it's not the ceiling, right? So this is to make sure that we're not in the sub basement somewhere. Okay. But we can always be above reproach, right? And always, because you always want to be cognizant of the appearance of impropriety as well. So you may not necessarily have someone who fits this explicit definition, but maybe it looks bad enough to where let's not do it. Okay. So that's the family piece, but then also business. Okay. Your business relationships also potentially create a conflict. So what that means is if you own a company, right? If you have business partners, you co-own an LLC or a partnership, a nonprofit organization. What else? You're outside your employer, right? Your main full-time employer. That is a business conflict. That is a business relationship, right? So your supervisors, your coworkers at your jobs, right, can also potentially create a conflict. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? All right. The next piece is the interest. So to be clear with respect to an interest, I want to put it this way. To have an interest in something, right? is to have a direct or material benefit to yourself, to a relative, or to a business associate or organization that you have an interest in. Okay. So again, we use this term direct or material, very intentional, right? Because the common misconception when it comes to whether or not you have an interest in something is that it has to be financial. Okay. And that is not the case. Okay. You can very much have an interest in something, even if you are not receiving money. All right. So there can be fiduciary interest. There can be other responsibilities that you may have to other people, to other entities, to other organizations, right? That may ultimately result in you having an interest in it. Except where that interest is generally available. And we'll get to that. I'll give you some examples of that momentarily. But so that's kind of that general statement, right? And so again, when we say this material piece, an interest is material if it's something that is of value to you, right? So it may not necessarily be of value to the person sitting next to you, right? Maybe your hoodie is something that you cherish and has been passed down and it's just, this thing, right? But maybe Charles cares nothing about your hoodie, right? To where it perhaps is material to you, right? But not material to somebody else. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, if it is financially related, we all have an interest in money. So there's nobody to say, oh, no, money's not material. No, yes, it is. Okay. We all have an interest in money. Okay. But in addition to that, we're also talking about interest in an organization, right? So organizational interest comes in two forms, ownership and commitment. Okay. So if you own a company, or more specifically, if you own 5% or more of a company, right, you have an interest in it. All right. And we use this threshold of 5%, both at the state level and at the city level, to essentially identify that if you have an interest that is, or ownership share that is less than 5%, you are probably not involved in the day-to-day decisions of that organization or that company, right? So let's say you own, you own 2% of Microsoft, for example, right? You're probably not sitting at the executive table making decisions about the company with your 2%, right? You're probably collecting your dividend and going on about your day. So more than 5% ownership stock or share, but also commitment. So even if you don't own it or have a financial stake, if you're a part of an organization where you took an oath or you made a commitment to act in the best interest of that organization, you have an interest in it. All right. So for example, went to law school at Cleveland State. I currently serve on the Alumni Association's Board of Trustees, right? When I got elected to that position, I took an oath to act in the best interest of the Alumni Association. What that now means is if the Alumni Association now wants to do business with the city of Cleveland, there's now a conflict and I can't be on both sides of that. Because when I started my job here, I took an oath to act in the best interest of the city of Cleveland, right? You all took the same oath. I saw you do it. I signed off on it. Right. So you all took an oath to act in the best interest. Right. So if you have other entities, other organizations that you also took a similar oath, then there's a potential conflict. Right. Does that make sense? Okay.
Does it have to be an actual oath or
no, it does not need to be an oath.
I work for an organization. Does that mean I have a commitment to that organization?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Your employers, absolutely. And also, and it may be dependent on your role with the organization. Now, certain volunteer things doesn't necessarily count towards that, right? So, for example, if you're doing Meals on Wheels, right, or something that you're just doing, you're not actually involved in the actual organizational or the operations of that entity, that might not necessarily create a conflict for you. But if you're involved in operations, potentially, yeah.
Probably going back a little, but it just popped in my head. Does disillusions count? Like if a person has a dissolution of marriage or a dissolution of a business partner?
No. So no, good question. If you have dissolved that relationship, then it's no longer a conflict per the law, right? Because if it explicitly says spouse and you're not spouse anymore, then no, they're not your spouse anymore, right? Business partner, you dissolve the partnership or dissolve the LLC, you're no longer business partners. Okay. Yeah.
So the fact that you would be on a board at CSU, also an ethics, or the ethics officer here in the city of Cleveland, I mean, that doesn't automatically guarantee a conflict, right? I mean, else you would have to leave one or the other.
Right. So, very good. You are taking me right into my next point, which is that it is not a violation to just have a conflict of interest. Okay, we expect there to be conflicts of interest, right? Every single one of you have come to the table with a conflict of interest, at least one, every single one of you, right? So we expect there to be conflicts. The issue is not having one, is what you do with it, right? That's the issue. So I want to be very clear on that, because it's one thing to say, hey, you got a conflict of interest. Like, okay, that's cool. That's cool, right? The question is whether or not it's possible to get around that conflict, right? And that's where I come in. That's where my office comes in, is to be able to look at that, to and to help navigate whether or not you can truly or properly navigate that conflict. Okay. So when it comes to conflicts, though, there's two things that are required for you to do. First is disclose it. Okay. First, you want to make sure that you disclose it. So once you guys have elected a chair, your chairs will be who you will disclose your conflicts to. Okay. Disclose it to the chair, disclose it to your executive director, disclose it to me, right? But you want to make sure that you disclose. And then once you disclose, then you want to make sure that you recuse. Okay, recuse yourself from any actual or potential matters where you have both the city and a personal interest, right? Or outside business interests. Right? What if you're not sure, right? What if you're not sure? And what I mean by that is, so the city of Cleveland does business with a number of different entities, businesses, people, organizations, et cetera, right? Does anybody sitting here know all the different businesses that City of Cleveland does business with? Anybody just have a ballpark figure of how many entities that might be? Thousands? How many thousands? 5,000?
10.
10 is probably closer, right? So if we do business with 10,000 different entities, I take it nobody sitting here knows all 10,000, right? Or more specifically, do any of you even already know the businesses that the CPC has done business with, or contracted with, or currently contracts with, right? So my point is, right? My point is, you have absolutely no idea where your conflicts lie. You have absolutely no idea, right? You have no idea whether or not your main full-time employer is also doing business with the city of Cleveland, right? In fact, I know a number of your employers do, right? City does all types of business with Sherwin-Williams. City does all types of business with towards employment, right? All right, like we have these relationships, and so you may not necessarily know that. And here's the thing, and this is why I want to be very, very transparent about and clear about. It is not expected that you just know it. Okay, what's expected is that you disclose kind of the things that you have going on outside of here, so that the proper people, i.e., me, right, can be able to assess that and provide you with guidance on how to navigate those things. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So you talked about disclosing, and you mentioned the chair, the executive director, and you. Is that sort of you should do all three, or choose one, or what is?
The recommendation would be all three. But again, this is also a piece that I think will come to your rules and bylaws committee. So as you set up kind of what's going to be your internal conflict of interest policy, right? This is something that I would recommend that you establish within your rules, as in what's going to be the procedure to deal with conflicts, because the conflicts will absolutely come up. They will absolutely come up. Right. Yes, sir.
Do you have copies of those?
Do you have copies of those slides or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get those to you. Yeah, we can get those to you.
Thank
you. Yeah. So yeah, Chandra.
Since the city has copies of all of our resumes, would that count as like assumption that disclosure has happened, at least the disclosures of like our employers?
No. I would not consider that a proper disclosure. Because the burden is on the person who has the conflict to disclose, right? And so not necessarily by virtue of, well, I filled out an application, so you have all my information, right? So yeah, I wouldn't rely on that. But when we talk about recusal, I want to touch on this a bit because this is what this is where I see the most mistakes when it comes to navigating conflicts of interest is improper recusals. Okay, to recuse yourself from a conflict of interest is to have no participation at all. Okay. It does not mean that you just don't vote on the matter. It does not mean that you just abstain from the matter, right? If you have a conflict, you need to remove yourself from the conversation altogether, right? Remove yourself altogether. It is not enough, right? There are a number, there are former council people literally sitting in jail right now to this day, right? For not properly recusing themselves. It is not enough to just say, hey, I abstain from the vote because I have a conflict, right? But then still be a part of the conversation. Okay, yeah.
So we were talking the other day about that, like when we released the applications for the grants. Say for instance, towards employment applies. I just get up and leave if we start discussing it.
Correct. Your organization puts forward some type of grant that comes before this body. I have a conflict. I'm leaving the room, right? Because then there's also, the possibility of kind of nonverbal communication as well that I personally would be concerned about. Like there's ways to still kind of get your point across without saying anything, right? So the best practice there is just to not be in the room if and when there's a conflict. Yeah, Alana.
And if you're no longer your employer, you don't have to worry about it, or do you still have to?
Correct. If you no longer have a fiduciary duty or responsibility or some other level of commitment to that entity, right, then it no longer conflicts you out. Right. But again, so that's one of those things though that I would caution to pay attention to the appearance of impropriety, right? So while it might not technically be a conflict anymore, think about what the headline will read, right? So let's say, say I'm, working for the city, I don't know, let's say I'm working for the city next 15, 20 years. And the very next day after I'm no longer here, and here I am involved in business that's going to, benefit myself personally or things like that, right? What's the headline going to read? Longtime city employee does X, Y, and Z, right? The court of public opinion does not always care about what the letter of the law says, right? So you want to always be cautious of that as well, and I can't stress that enough. But
I'm kind of curious for like thinking on kind of like some of the highest levels of governance in the city, like our city council members. Obviously, it's a little easier to disentangle the financial benefit, but I mean, by virtue of living in their wards, don't they all stand to have material benefits from like things that they advocate for in their wards? Like, how? I mean, how do you manage those conflicts?
Sure. No, so that's a good question. And yes, it comes up a lot. But one of the things that the ethics law takes into consideration is community benefit, right? So if you're putting something through that, yes, it might inherently affect your community, or you might have some type of benefit. So, for example, where this comes up a lot is when it comes to real estate or housing or land or those types of things, where it's like, hey, we're voting to put a park in this neighborhood that's not going to increase the value of my home. How about that, right? There are carve outs for that. So that's not necessarily applicable in this type of situation, right? It's more about It's more about those, again, those family and family business benefits, or personal benefits, right? That puts something kind of directly in your pocket is one thing if it does it for the whole community or for a subset of individuals. It's another when, you know, that one person's house is the only house that happened to get more value, right? So again, are we cool on or good on recusal? Okay, so recuse is or completely withdraw from that matter, not abstaining. It does not matter if you're not the final decision maker on it, right? So, yeah, question.
Yeah, I want to dig into this appearance thing and like where we need to do with that. So, you know, obviously if I have a family member who works towards employment, I would have to recuse, it's clear. But if my best friend works there, that's more appearance. And it seems like, or even like if you could imagine a case were to go through the process and be heard by the commission around something to do with, you know, police discipline. Okay, if it's a family member of mine, it's pretty clear, but if it's a friend of mine, that's appearance. So in your opinion, does this group need, in the rules process, need to sort of name stuff like that? Or is that, I mean, how do we manage that kind of thing?
Yeah, so good question. And I think I certainly would recommend that the group or the body, you know, takes that into consideration. And again, you can establish in your bylaws and your rules standards that are stricter, right, than the baseline level, right? So if you guys decide, hey, you know what, we all agree that if we have to review discipline of somebody and you're friends with them, we don't want that, right? So you can do that. And I encourage you to look at those things, right? I mean, now you want to be careful about, you know, what you pitching yourselves into, right? And those standards, but I encourage the consideration of the appearance and what additional standards you might want to put in place. All right, so we good here? All right. So let me switch gears a little bit and talk about public contracts. All right. So again, we talked about the city engages with thousands of different entities to engage in the services and products and goods and things like that we need to operate as a city, i.e. a public contract. So there are 4 restrictions for public officials and public employees with respect to public contracts, right? And so you cannot authorize a public contract where you, a family member or a business associate, has an interest. Authorize an investment of public funds, which a family member, business associate has an interest, right? So that would kind of speak to like your grant making authority, for example, right? Profiting from a public contract authorized by you or this board. So even if you weren't necessarily a part of the decision making, but if the board authorizes something that you somehow then benefit from later, right? That's still going to be a problem. Unless that contract was competitively bid, but again, that's a whole nother nuance there. And then, but lastly, as a catch-all, having an interest in a public contract entered into by the city. All right. So here's what this essentially means. What this essentially means is you cannot sell your services to the city, right? That's basically what it means, right? You have a business on the side. You know, say you have a catering business, and CPC wants to host a community event. CPC can't hire your catering company, right? You also can't authorize, you know, hiring a relative catering company, right? Now, if something has gone through like a competitive bid process, which again could look different. So, for example, my brother has a pest control business, right? So, if the director of public works says, "Hey, we're looking for pest control companies," I can't say, "Hey, I got a brother. Go call him up." Sorry if you're watching this, brother. He ain't watching. Right, but I can't do that now. But that does not mean though that my brother cannot have business or do business with the city of Cleveland. Okay, he can do it. He can do business with the city, but it needs to be completely independent of me. I cannot be involved in securing or getting business to my brother's business. If I just happen to see him around City Hall one day treating the building, I'm like, oh, okay, looks like you got a contract, right? And I had absolutely nothing to do with it. Question.
So you can't even let him know.
So Not unless I cannot give him information that's not available to the general public, right? So if it's something that's literally open to the public, that's one thing. But if I'm giving him any type of inside information, like, hey, well, here's the person you want to call, or here's what you really should send it to make sure this gets some traction, right? Those are the types of things that you have to avoid. Okay. So again, can't sell your services to the city. That's essentially what that means. There is an exception. It's very unlikely that you'll meet this exception, but it's possible. So I'll at least just tell you that this exists. But there's a 4-part test to determine whether or not you can meet this exception, whether or not you can basically do business or otherwise benefit from a city contract. The contract must be for necessary goods or services, meaning that in this particular contract, we need this, right? We absolutely need this for operations. 2, goods or services are unobtainable anywhere else for the same or lower cost. This is the part that's difficult to me because essentially what that means is you're going to be the only game in town, right? And in this day of e-commerce, right, it's pretty difficult that you're the only company that can provide some particular service. Now, granted, it does happen, especially for specialty areas like the airport, for example. A number of areas in public safety when it comes to certain things, right? So it's possible. But generally pretty difficult standard to meet. But if somehow you meet those first 2, the third standard is that you must get the city the same treatment or better treatment as other clients or customers. So basically what that means is if you realize that, oh, wait a minute, I got the only business that can provide this service to the city, I better jack up the price, right? That's what you can't do. Conveniently, the lawmakers decided to make sure they cut that out, right? And then lastly, you must take no part in deliberations or decisions of the city under the contract, right? So if somehow that situation might come up here, it just means that you can't be a part of those conversations here if somehow these other elements are met. Right? But again, very difficult standard to meet, but it is possible. But this is certainly something I would highly encourage you, come talk to me about if this is something that even remotely looks like it's going to come up. All right, we good there? All right, let's keep moving. All right, use of authority. So here, what's important to know is that as community police commissioners, you cannot use your positions to secure a financial or material benefit to yourself, to a relative, or to an organization in which you have an interest. All right. And so essentially what that means is if something comes before you, right, something comes before this body in your official capacity, and your decision is somehow going to benefit yourself privately, going to benefit a relative or an organization, right, that's what you want to make sure that you're careful about not improperly acting on. Okay. It also means to be careful or mindful because this is where friends and family get you in trouble, right? When somebody calls you up and say, and I'm sure you've all experienced this in your respective job, right, where somebody calls you up and says, you work for such and such, don't you? Right? And then insert whatever favor they're about to ask for. Right? The biggest culprit of this in my life is my mother. Okay? Calls me up nonstop. She's literally gonna call me while we in here. Like she calls me nonstop. She'll call me up and she'll say, so she owns a property in Cleveland in enough area, and she has a tenant, right? So maybe one of the last times, for example, she said, can you go down to? I need you to go to the building and housing office for me, and I need you to get me a new rental registration certificate, right? I need you to do it. So I said, well, I can't quite do that, right? Then it turns into, hold up. So what's the point of having a son that work in City Hall if you can't go and do something, right? And so where that might translate is, right, you got a friend or somebody, right, that's in trouble. And they say, well, what good is it having a friend on the community police commission if we can't, if I can get it on benefits from this, right? So I'm like, listen, Mike, I can't really do that, right? Especially I'm the ethics officer, I really can't do it. So you're gonna make your 65-year-old mother come all the way downtown and pay for parking just to get this paper that you can literally walk upstairs and get? I gotta put it like that, right? But seriously, this is where your friends and family will get you in trouble. They will ask you to do things. They will ask you to push the envelope. Okay, this is where these standards come in play. Okay, you cannot use your position to secure a benefit, whether financial or material, to yourself, a relative, or an organization. All right. You also want to be careful about not using city resources for personal use. Okay. So the laptops you were issued, right? Careful about your use there, your email accounts, right? Those types of things. And you'll have a much deeper conversation about public records when we get to that, or when they get to that, following this conversation. But you want to make sure you're not using city resources for personal use. So again, that can be equipment, computers, internet use, phones, interoffice mail, supplies, etc. Right? CPC is not your personal office. It's not your personal office. It's for the work of the commission. Okay, so you want to be very, very clear about that. You shouldn't be directing staff to run your personal errands. That's not what it's for. But it happens, right? It happens a lot. So you want to be very mindful about that. What else? Any questions here? Okay. I had an example. So I had an employee once where there was a department actually, and they were hiring for a new staff person in this department. And so the chief of staff of this department, his brother was particularly well qualified for the job that they were looking to fill. And so chief of staff says, okay, well, I'm going to recuse myself, right? Because my brother's probably going to apply for this job. So I'm not going to interview my brother. I'm going to be hands off. I'm not going to review his application, right? Cool. So then they proceed through the interview process, and then ultimately they decide. The director of the department makes a call that, hey, okay, we actually do want to hire the brother, right? The brother was the best person for the job. And then they come to me, to our office, and they ask, we're good, right? Because that's kind of how you got to ask them. You just want it to already be okay. So we're okay, right? Like, we're good. No, come on, bring it back. Because we're actually not good. We're not even close to being good. And they're like, what's wrong? And I was like, well, you didn't properly recuse yourself. And they're like, well, what do you mean? There were three things that the chief of staff did that we found issues with. For the second time, I'll just tell you what they are. So first, the chief of staff had a hand in writing the job description. Okay. Correct, right? You had a hand in writing the job description. Number two, while the chief of staff didn't interview his brother, he did interview the other applicants for the job. Right? So imagine me in that situation as being like, say, well, hey, director, I don't really know how good or bad my brother was, but I can tell you, everybody else, nope, no go. Right? And thirdly, there was still this aura, this improper influence because of your position as the chief of staff. Right? And so how would that actually work in practice? So can now your brother now report around you? Right? Like how does that work? And even if we allow that, what type of morale, what does that now create for the rest of the team? Huh? So what happened in this particular situation? We said, no, you cannot hire the brother because unfortunately you didn't properly recuse yourself. You were already involved in the process, so it was too late. It was too late to recuse yourself and say, okay, I'm not going to interview my brother. Sorry, it's too deep here. So can't hire the brother, go back to the drawing board, find another applicant. So that's what happened in that particular situation. So this applies more so towards employees, but again, I'll tell you this because ultimately your executive director reports to you. As I mentioned before, not coercing or requiring employees that work for you to perform tasks unreasonably outside of the scope of their employment, right? So your executive director, the CPC staff is not here to run your personal errands, right? Not here to walk your dogs and pick up your dry cleaning and do any of the above. Okay, does not happen. Okay. if that happened, y'all call me and we'll go ahead and kick one of them off right now, right? So again, just be mindful about that. Also be mindful about financial entanglements, right? Financial entanglements. It's a bad idea. It almost always goes wrong. It almost always goes wrong, right? Imagine this situation. Once I had an employee who, the employee supervisor was also their landlord, right? So can you imagine? Can you imagine? Your supervisor is also your landlord, right? So picture this situation where it's like, it's February, it's dead of winter, not this winter, but a regular February winter, right? It's dead of winter, and you got small kids at home, and your heat goes out, right? You call the landlord, won't answer, email won't answer, text won't answer, right? You done drove by the house, they hiding inside. But guess what? You gonna see the landlord tomorrow morning at work, right? Now, is anybody in that situation gonna get to work the next day and say, "Oh, wait a minute, we at work now, so I guess I can't talk about this because I have to keep this separate"? Anybody gonna do that? No, right? You're handling that situation immediately the next day, right? That's why the financial entanglements are important to just avoid, because it goes wrong, and then now those landlord-tenant issues become work issues. Okay, leave your stuff outside, right? Be careful about how you engage in outside or private business with each other, with the staff, with other city employees, entities, etc. Okay, be very, very careful about that. All right, we good here?
Yep.
Question.
Yeah, I have one question. The previous slide mentioned that misuse includes time. Can you just give us a quick example of that?
Yes. You guys are gonna put in way more time than what you're getting paid for, so it's less of an issue for you guys. But we may owe y'all some. But no. So essentially, what we mean, so again, by virtue of being employees, right, is making sure that you're using your time effectively, and not misusing that, right? And so where it comes in more in our employee situations, right? Which is why I kind of glossed over it here. So like for example, I once got a complaint about an employee who was misreporting their time, right? So they were reporting that they were working 8 hours a day, when in fact they were only working 3 to 4 hours a day, right? But then it turned into a whole bigger issue because we realized that it wasn't just that one employee, it was actually the entire department. And the entire department was doing it at the direction of the supervisor, right? So they're saying like, "Oh yeah, just go ahead and put your time in, like, you're good." And then you go to the supervisor and they say, why are you telling your staff to do that? That's what I was told to do when I was in that position, right? And you go up the chain and then you realize, okay, this is a culture issue, right? Because this is the way we've always done it, right? I call that second last words of government, right? It's the way we've always done it, okay? So that's kind of what I mean by that. In that particular situation I was just talking about, that resulted in about $500,000 worth of stolen time, right? And for how many of you live in Cuyahoga County? Okay. So y'all paid for it, right? You have to, right. So y'all, we all pay for that. We literally pay for that. So the point there is we don't want our tax dollars spent that way, so let's not turn around and spend people's tax dollars that way, right? So when you're here doing the work of the commission, do the work of the commission. Okay. All right. So just some other examples of how you can misuse your authority. So again, using your official title in private business. Okay, so be careful about that. So especially to the extent that you might be involved in police work or accountability work or any type of reform work, you want to be careful about putting yourself in a situation and say, "Oh, okay, well, I'm on the Cleveland's Community Police Commission, so whatever that get me, give it to me," right? That's what you want to be careful about. Making sure you keep that separate. Again, not using this office to run your own private business, right? That's not what this is for. Suppressing public records can also be an issue as well. That could be a misuse of your authority. And again, I'll leave the public records conversation to Amy. But again, it's just for you to know that any destruction, suppression, or manipulation of public records is also an ethics violation. Okay? So that'll be the extent of what I will share with respect to that. Next piece is misuse of confidential information. So again, each and every single one of you will have access to confidential information. And so it's important to note that Ohio law prohibits the disclosure, misuse, and improper access of confidential information, okay? So that can come through whether it's a database that you have access to, whether it's conversations, your board meetings, seeing or overhearing information, documents that you will review, right? You have an obligation not to misuse or disclose that information, okay? Yeah.
When we go into executive session, is that confidential?
Yes, but it's not so clear, right? So the conversations do not have to be public, but again, this can be more of an Amy question. But and actually, I just kind of learned this because I actually had to ask about this recently. If some type of document is created while in the executive session, then that also could potentially be public record. But again, I don't want to go too deep into that because it's not my area. But I want to highlight this improper access. Oh, before I go there, I want to be clear that this is prohibited both during and after service. Okay, so even after you're off of this board, right, you're still required not to disclose or misuse information that you learned while being a public servant. Okay. Improper access, again, I want to make sure I stress that enough because, or I can't stress that enough, is, again, don't let curiosity kill the cat, right? There's lots of things that you may have access to that is not necessarily in accordance with a project, with an assignment, with a task, with a case or a matter that might actually be before you, right? So be careful about how you're using your authority, right, to gain access to information that has nothing to do with your work or what you got going on. So, yeah.
Are there forms that the commissioners will be required to sign with that confidentiality agreement, or is this just word of mouth?
So there's a acknowledgement form that we have that I'll distribute today to essentially say that we covered the ethics law. So there's that piece, if that's what you mean. But you mean if there's a more specific confidentiality policy. So again, that's something else that if this body wants to create, right, or have a policy, and we can also look at see what the city already has or what other boards and commissions may be using. But we could certainly take a look at that. So again, just be careful about the improper access. Yes.
So I think confidential information is often very clear, but are there cases that it may not clear whether it's confidential? Or will it be labeled? Will it be?
So yeah, I mean, it could come up. I mean, there's certainly nuances. So, because you're right, there are things that are going to be clear, right? Things that might have social security numbers on it, medical information, maybe sometimes some addresses or those types of things. There could be things that are not so clear cut as to whether it's confidential or not. But again, it's also a reason why you have an entire law department, right, at your disposal to be able to ask those questions case by case, right? So it's difficult, it's difficult for me to stand here and kind of give you kind of hey, this is this and this is not this. Because a lot of it is case by case and it's fact specific, right? So one document, there could be certain elements of a document that's confidential that might need to be redacted, but perhaps other elements are required to be disclosed. So it depends is really the answer there.
Should requests for clarification on something be made in writing to the law department, or a telephone call would be sufficient?
I think it depends on the request, right? I mean, if there's a quick question about something, right, we can certainly address that, but certainly related to, especially any case or any matter or anything like that, right? If you're asking for an actual legal opinion on something, then yes, put that in writing. Put that in writing. I mean, and it's always just good practice to put those things in writing anyway, right? So that there's a record that you asked the question, when you asked it, who you asked it to, right? Just to cover yourselves as well. All right. So again, lifetime. So don't think you get to be 95 and on your deathbed ready to write your tell-all book about what you saw and what y'all discussed in this room. Okay, because we can put you in jail for those last couple days. Okay? Great. All right. Yes, ma'am.
So about about using certain things, because we ain't got emails, for example, like we get a discount for the Y. Is it that we are not supposed to use those types of things? Like, is that something that is?
So good
Yeah,
question.
we get discounts for a lot of stuff. They be emailing us all the time about all the city discounts, but I don't know if we're real city employees or not. So that's my question.
So good question. And I'm going to get to that literally like in 2 slides.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about that in a second. Here's my time. Okay, I'm already over. Okay, so all right, really quickly, nepotism. Okay, this is one of the largest issues. One of the largest issues in the state when it comes to ethics. It's nepotism. All right, and there's a very simple F word that I associate with nepotism. What is it? Family? Nope, ain't it. Ain't it. I mean, family is associated, but no, stronger than favoritism. Favors? No. Come on, no, you know some strong F words. Broad, stronger. We getting closer. Felony. Okay. Nepotism is a 4th-degree felony in the state of Ohio. Okay. Nepotism is a 4th-degree felony in the state of Ohio. All right. We cannot, as public employees, public officials, we cannot participate in any decision to hire, promote, discipline, or discharge a relative. We cannot serve in supervisor subordinate relationships with a relative. Okay. 4th-degree felony in Ohio. All right. This has been, I've been doing this ethics training tour since September. I've done probably about 30, 40 presentations. This is usually one of the jaw droppers, right? And I say that to say too, and again, we also are been having these conversations also with our Department of Public Safety as well. And the reason why I want to emphasize that to you guys too is because, historically, right? Because again, think about when the ethics law was created, and it didn't always exist, right? But historically, right, especially in local government, it's been built on nepotism. It's been built on nepotism, right? So it's important, and we got to change that. Right? We got to change that. So we're doing things internally to work on that, but I bring it to your attention as well because it's something that may come up that you may see with respect to the Division of Police. So again, 4th-degree felony. All right. Yes. Question.
Would that mean that anyone high enough in the chain of command of the police couldn't have a relative that's in the force? Because I mean, a lot of families have 3rd or 4th generation officers.
Correct. So similar to the public contract piece, right? It doesn't mean that your family can't work, right, for the city or can't work in the division, right? That's fine. But once there becomes a supervisor subordinate relationship, now we got a problem. And now, so to your point, police chiefs' relatives cannot work in the division of police. Doesn't matter what the level is. Doesn't matter. It's not about just direct supervision. It's the chain of command, right? Cannot be in the chain of command, right? One of the first things I did when I came on as the chief ethics officer for the city, had this conversation, right, with the mayor, right? Your relatives can't work here. Doesn't matter if they're a lifeguard or somewhere completely remote. No. Okay, we can't do it. All right. So again, chain of command. Now, again, like I said, it doesn't mean that people can't work in the same department, right? So you may see that in the division of police. But that supervisory structure is what we need to be mindful of. Okay. Because again, like things happen, right? People meet at work, they get married, right? And then somebody gets promoted, right? And now we got a problem. So something to be mindful about there. All right, last couple of things. Gifts. Okay, gifts. So while nepotism might be the number one issue in the state with respect to ethics, gifts is probably the number one or very close number two issue that I'm seeing locally here here in the city. And also in the 5 years that I spent doing this type of work in Cuyahoga County, this was absolutely the number one issue, was gifts. Okay, as public employees, public officials, you cannot solicit or accept things of value that have both a substantial and an improper influence with respect to your duties. Now that's the kind of formal definition, but let me just kind of break down what that actually means, right? Because there's three moving parts here. First is anything of value, right? So you can solicit or accept anything of value. That can be anything. Anything is a thing of value, right? So cash, tickets, gift cards, dinners, retreats, receptions, you know, ink pen, water bottle, keychain, right? All those things are things of value. Okay, piece of paper, right? Thing of value. That thing of value has to be substantial in value, and it has to come from an improper source, right? In order for it to be a problem, right? So the state has what's called a substantial and improper test to determine whether or not a gift is improper, all right? The common misconception here is that there's some magical amount, right? The magical grace limit, a little bit of breaking the law is okay. And because you might have heard this before, right? In your respective jobs, or if you know, been in employment, you know, in government before, there is a $25 threshold. Okay, that's not a thing. Okay? That is not a thing. The state has no set amount for determining whether or not a gift or an item or a thing of value is substantial. It looks at it case by case. Now, while there's no set amount, the Ethics Commission has identified categories of things to help us determine whether or not something is improper or not. So, for example, promotional items, right? So the ink pens, the keychains, the water bottles, or the coffee mugs, right? Those are not considered to be substantial. Okay. Meals of a routine character, right? So you're going to engage in some type of contract, and maybe the vendor wants to come in and do a session or show you something, or a demo, or what have you, right? They want to bring food to the meeting. What happens is, let's say you're entertaining two vendors for a contract. Vendor A comes in, they bring some Subway sandwiches, some subs, right, or some chips, that type of thing. Maybe it's a little continental breakfast if it's early or on a Saturday. But then vendor B comes in and they bring steak and they bring lobster, right? And they got the whole spread, right? So then when your executive director comes to you and Jason says, "Okay, group, which vendor did you like?" A steak vendor, right? The lobster vendor, right? That's the type of influence that we don't want contractors to have over city business, right? So meals of a routine character, things that are small, fine. Lavish meals, not fine. Okay, lavish meals, not fine. So that's the substantial piece. But things like travel, like I said, the lavish meals, tickets, and discounts, those are always going to be considered substantial, right? So don't even question it. Write it down, send it to them. I said it. Always substantial, right? No CAFs tickets. CAFs tickets are considered to be substantial. But again, the other piece though is it has to come from an improper source, right? So even if it is substantial, it also has to come from an improper source, meaning it comes from any person, company, organization, or entity that is doing business with the city, seeking to do business with the city, regulated by the city, or interested in matters before the city, right? Now, we just talked about this. There's thousands of them. So you won't necessarily know when the next time somebody comes to me and say, "Okay, here, I just got these tickets for you, so here y'all go," right? Again, this is why my office exists, is to be able to navigate these types of conflicts, because we're not going to expect you to just know who's doing business or who's trying to do business with us, right? These are the questions that I'm flooded with each and every single day. Hey, I got offered this. Are we allowed to accept it? Can we do this? Can we go to this? Right? Somebody may want to say, "Hey, you know what? Oh, you're a new commission. We want to sponsor everybody to go to the NACO conference," right? Let's figure out who's actually sponsoring it. Do we do business with them? Are they trying to secure some type of other favor or have improper influence? Question.
So can we take advantage of the email from the city about the why?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
It came from the city.
Okay. Okay. So yes. So there are some exceptions to the gift rule. Okay. Exceptions to the gift rule. First is gifts that are commonly given for special occasions. Okay. Really quickly, let me tell you what that means and what that does not mean. Contrary to popular belief, your birthday is not special. I'm just a messenger on that. Your birthday is not special. Okay? Birthdays, holidays, things that happen on a recurring basis, that's not what we mean by special occasion. Special occasions are things that do not happen on a recurring basis, right? So somebody gets married, somebody has a baby, somebody retires, somebody has a death in the family, right? Those are the things we consider to be special occasions. Now, unless your grandmother dying every year at the same time, so you can try to get some stuff, right? Then maybe we have a problem. But generally speaking, right, that's where we are on that. I don't know how many of you have or how long you guys have been Clevelanders to remember former Cuyahoga County Sheriff McFall. Well, Sheriff McFall had a birthday club. Right. And as part of the birthday club, everybody in the sheriff's department had to make a financial contribution when his birthday came around. Yeah, when his birthday. And when it was your birthday, you didn't get to be the recipient of the birthday club. Right. When Sheriff McFall's birthday came around, the higher ranking officials in the office or in the sheriff's department went around with the collection plates. Right. And what you had to give was based on what your position was or what your rank and file was. Right. So if you're a corrections officer, you had to give one amount. If you were a sergeant, you had to give another amount. Right. And it went up as your rank went up. And if you did not give, it was guaranteed that some type of adverse employment action was going to happen. Right. So maybe you got the bad shifts. Maybe you got fired. Maybe you got demoted. Right. Something was going to happen if you didn't contribute. Right. So Sheriff McFall was ultimately indicted and convicted on 31 counts of ethics violations. Because it said that what was found to be uncovered was about $600,000 to $700,000 worth of stolen money. That's what can be tracked. A lot of this, of course, was happening in cash, so I would imagine it could have been upwards of $1 million, right? Oh no, it was old school. It was old school. Everybody did the collection plate, right? And this also was when it was campaign season time, right? You had to contribute to the clam bakes and the fundraisers, and you had to sell tickets, and you better make sure you got up in office, right? Because you came back in and you didn't contribute. It's like, I know that ain't who I think it is. Still thinking they got a job after they didn't help me get reelected, right? So birthday not special. Okay. Another exception is where the employee or official pays face value, right? So if somebody gives you something and you actually pay for it, then it's not a gift anymore because you paid for it, right? And then lastly, and this is where Alana's question comes in, is gifts or discounts that are generally made available to the public. Okay, so things that are widespread. Now, with a small caveat to some of the things that the city of Cleveland has already worked out, right? These are already agreements that we've worked out. Right. So it's one thing if we have a contract to say, hey, for us to do X, Y, and Z, we get city employees get to have, this discount, right? We can contract for that. But it'd be another thing if an entity on the side of any business then wants to give us extra things. Does that make sense? So we can contract for something, but just an added gift is a little bit different. So another area where this comes up is, let's take like Cedar Point, for example. Every summer they have public employee discount days, right? So for public employees or public officials, you can get discount tickets to Cedar Point during the month of June, usually. That's something that's literally open to all public employees. It's not just any one particular subset or division. So if it's generally made available for everybody or for a large subset, then that can be okay. However, if you know or have reason to know that was intended to influence you, though, it can still be a problem. Okay, so that's kind of the catch to the catch. All right. All right. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just one quick thing along with what Alana was saying. So these emails that we're receiving our city, we're to assume that they're all not okay?
No. So I guess my point is that for things that the city has already made agreements with these entities to secure these discounts for our employees and staff, right? That's fine, right? Because we're in a contract with them, right? We're in agreement. Where the fear comes in is where you have outside entities that want to come and give you stuff. All right. Related to gifts, supplemental compensation. The only thing I want to point out here is that for better or for worse, whether you personally agree with this or not, you all agree that your stipends are enough to do this work. So what that means is you cannot then accept additional compensation for doing your work, right? So for example, let's say there is there's some organization that says, hey, you know what? Good job, commission. You guys have been doing great work. Here's gift cards for you all. Here's a tip. Here's tickets to a game, right? No. And the reason, and this is different than the gift rule because this does not take into consideration the substantial and improper test that we just talked about, right? This is just per se, somebody gives you anything that's in appreciation or in gratitude or as a reward for doing the work that you already agreed to do, then it's improper. Okay. So that could be even a dollar. Somebody hands you a dollar bill and says, hey, here's for your hard work. Crime. Right. This is first degree misdemeanor, right? Punishable up to 6 months in prison, $1,000 fine. And if convicted, you can be disqualified from working in public service for 7 years. Okay. So no extra compensation. Now the city can provide, right? And that's from an outside entity, right? If the city decides to do something special, right? That's different. Okay. So I want to be clear about that. All right. And then last thing, I usually throw this in here. This is not really an ethics issue per se, but it is just Ohio law. I just need you to know that raffles are illegal in the state of Ohio. Well, at least as of today, there may be some new laws coming down the pipeline that make that a little bit different. But so 50-50 raffles, or if you're thinking about ways to fundraise or things like that, yeah, raffles is not the way to do it. And this is not just for public employees. This is just period in the state of Ohio. Now, there are exceptions to this. So, for example, religious organizations, fraternal organizations, nonprofits can conduct raffles, or if you've applied to host one with the state of Ohio, right? So you've applied for a permit. Those are the exceptions. A governmental entity or body is not an exempted organization that can conduct a raffle. Okay. So yeah, and the Cavs have, for example, they have a foundation that technically runs that, right? So same situation here. Division of Police have a foundation, or there's a foundation that exists to benefit the division, right? So I've literally just had to have this conversation with Division of Police about this, right? Because they were all up in arms when I said no raffles, right? They're like, whoa. And I was like, well, no. You have a foundation. It just needs to happen through the foundation, right? We can't conduct it as city employees, okay? And then very last thing, at some point we're all leaving, right? Whether your term ends or, whether you kicked off or at some point, right? We're all out of here. So it's important to know that there's a revolving door statute that essentially follows you after your service on the commission. So what that means is that you cannot, for up to 12 months after service, during and up to 12 months after, represent another entity in matters that you personally participated in while you were serving in this capacity, right? So what that means is if there's a matter that comes before you, right, that you're involved in, that you're participating in, if there's an event or a project or some other work of the commission that you might be involved in, what you cannot do is then go work or serve for another entity and work on those exact same matters that you were working on for the commission. Does that make sense? Right. So again, and that's for up to 12 months. After that 12 months has expired, then you're free to do whatever it is you want to do, except disclose confidential information, because that's lifetime. Okay. So again, if there's ever questions about this, because this gets very nuanced and it's not always clear. So please come to me if you feel like, hey, right, especially because this is where the conflicts lie, especially like you guys are all involved in other community things and other projects, right? So this is where you want to be very, very careful that you're not involved in things that you're also involved with here. Okay.
Just a quick question. Is that just within the state of Ohio, or is that just nationally?
State of Ohio.
Okay.
State of Ohio. So this is called our revolving door statute. And then this applies more so towards employees. It's political activity, so not so much for you guys. Just important to know that by being a public official, you're not prohibited, obviously, from voting and registering to vote. You can serve as poll workers. So this position does not prohibit you from doing those things. But again, as your rules and bylaws committee continue to develop your rules, you may want to think about if you want additional provisions that look at political activity and whether or not there are some concerns there, right, about what that looks like for the commission if you have somebody that wants to run for office or those types of things. So again, we can have a deeper conversation about that at some point, but I want to at least bring that to your attention. Yeah, Alana.
What if your job outside of the city requires you to engage in political activity?
Yeah, so good question. So again, there's not necessarily a piece that explicitly prohibits that. So again, but that's something that you guys will want to talk about internally if you want to set some type of standard across the board about what political activity looks like, what are the caveats, maybe what are the exceptions, right? So mostly it applies in terms of classified and unclassified employees for the most part. All right, so that's all I got. If to report concerns for any of the issues that we've talked about, right? So internally, we have our division of internal audit that has an anonymous tip line that we recently set up. Other internal sources include HR, prosecutor's office, my office. But externally, there's issues that can be reported to the state auditor's office, which also has an anonymous tip line. The Ohio Ethics Commission and the Attorney General's office are also avenues as well to report concerns if any of these types of things come up. So like I said, that's all I got. Our goal here though is one, making sure we understand that this is not about personal ethics, right? This is about our actual standard. And so I want to be clear about that because I cannot tell you the number of times I'm getting this is unethical. Like, okay, well, hold on. maybe not, right? I might not personally agree with this, but we got to actually look at the standard here. So I want to start to create that distinction. And then making sure you guys are leading by example, right? You guys are going to be in the public eye, making sure that you are above reproach, right? I'm doing the same thing. I recognize that there are standards, but in my position, I need to be above reproach because the public is watching. There are people holding me accountable. And so the same will be the case for you. And encourage each other to ask questions, right? That's always a pitfall is you haven't, because you guys will get to know each other more, right? And there will be those situations where somebody will have a question and you may just decide to turn like, I think we're okay, right? Let's just do it. We're good, right? Ask questions, right? Ask questions because there are people sitting in prison right now because they didn't ask questions because they didn't seek guidance. Okay. So yeah, and just know that, the last thing I'll leave you with is that we are, as public officials and public employees, we are held to a higher standard of care, right? Things that happen each and every single day in the private sector, right? So for some of your jobs, that things that you're able to do each and every single day are potential misdemeanors and felonies for us. Every single thing that we talked about today has criminal liability. Every single thing we talked about. So I didn't necessarily point out the exact level of crime for each and every single thing, but every single thing in here we talked about is at least a first-degree misdemeanor. Okay, everything is criminal with respect to the ethics law. All right. All right, so that said, I'm done. Thank you. You've been an attentive audience. Again, come and find me if you have questions, comments, concerns, or just things you want to run by me. I encourage it. I welcome it. And so yeah, so that said, I guess we'll turn it over for the open meetings and public records piece of it. So apologize when the little we started 10, 15 minutes late, but yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. Thank you.
This floor is present at the frame. Shelley, can you show Carolyn the restroom?
So no. So yes, it is. Like the budget is for that is where the money's coming from. It's not set up where so I actually sent you all an email yesterday. That's today. Yesterday or today, I sent it out to explain what's going on. But I'll take the break. But basically, so HR process everybody's paperwork.
Hey Jason,
Yeah.
do you have a USB-C charger? Plug my phone in.
HR process.
I
They put it in. I went to sign off on it. And then I realized that they processed it under public safety. And I realized that, oh, no. Their own thing. And I thought that was just a quick process to say, like, okay, just set it up on the thing. And it has not been a process. Like every single day I've had to like have some meeting or sign some paper to try to set it up.
Yeah, that is true.
Last like 2 years. So I went down to the payroll office. I got their signature to see the contract. And I will say, budget has made it difficult. But the HR side of things was good. Finance, we got that delivered today. You guys will get paid retroactively, so starting from your effective date in December. So yes, we will be paid retroactively.
Jason, can you pull up mine?
Yes.
Twice. So payroll is figuring out now which way the retroactive pays. There's probably like December. So they will figure out whether or not they have to issue those live checks or
You could
some.
plug it into that chart.
Those bills are absolutely in motion. And once I learned of the issue, I now personally
We still are broadcasting, just so you know, so any conversation that we might be on the internet right
There's a wellness.
Right?
There's a QR code that you scan. You scan a QR code and it's gonna use this right here.
Okay, I just assumed,
They have all kinds of. Yeah. No, I'm saying there was I put up on my computer.
I've got something.
Yeah.
So, what's going on? Okay.
I did.
Yeah, you did. No. We was
I never do rap.
They don't never say.
What else?
Oh,
I never do that. Everywhere I go, there's a rap.
I know. That's wild.
Right.
I know it's nice. But supposed to begin them with that. Oh, okay. Like, no, who does it?
What school was it? Alexander Hamilton.
Hey, y'all think we're ready to get started?
Yeah. They tore it down years
Oh,
ago.
but Curtis Taylor was back up on the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
It was.
All right. So,
Yes, yeah, I can send you that. That going around is just an acknowledgement form that we take the training or that the information is online. Just leave those with Amy, and thank you in advance for bringing those back to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Alante. Okay.
Keys for your custom clicker. Okay. Thank you, Delante. I am Amy Huff. I'm the Public Records Chair in the Law Department. I'm here with the Ohio Sunshine Laws, aka Why Can't I Just Watch a Video About This? It's well worth your time. This is the Public Records Law is your media training, and the Sunshine Law is your infrastructure. It touches every single thing that you do. You can't run without it. Am I using this right? Oh, it might not.
CPC.
Click it on. I can
CPC.
if you don't mind. All right. So today we're going to keep it really simple because it is actually nuanced and complex. Identify a public record, identify a meeting, and understand your obligations under both. There are 3 criteria for something to be a public record. One, it has to be a thing. Right? Your thoughts aren't a public record. a document, a device, or item, in fixed medium. This one's long. Created by, received by, or coming under the jurisdiction. I'm just going to say your office, the commission, okay, instead of public office. Obviously, created by. Received by means things that are sent to you. You didn't make it, maybe didn't even ask for it, but it was sent to you. Under your jurisdiction means possibly a vendor you're working with, a nonprofit you're working with, grant organization you're working with. They may have documents that you have access to, you can simply ask for them to send to you. Those are subject to records requests as well. Record documents the organization, functions, policies, decisions, procedures, operations, or other activities of the office. You can see how huge that definition is. It covers a lot. And the guiding principle that I've seen in case law is, does this give a taxpayer insight into how you're spending their money? It's really the bottom line. Where's the money going? How are you spending it? What are you doing with it? That's what these records are for. Here are 5 really fast facts about the records because we're going to go fast tonight and cover a lot. Confidentiality clauses are void. You can't have them. You can't put them in anything. They can't exist. Okay. You'll see sometimes the law department will release a settlement agreement in part of a lawsuit. We have to. There's no such thing as a confidential settlement agreement. There's no such thing as an NDA in the law department. Private entities working on the city's behalf or on your behalf can also be subject to the PRA, the Public Records Act. If there's a 4-part test, I'm going to skip over it. We'll come back to it if you ever need it, where they're essentially working so closely in the function of yourselves that they are effectively you. And their records are going to be subject to the Public Records Act. I think we covered this one. Not in our possession, but we still control it. Litigation and civil discovery are a separate animal, but you may encounter them in the work that you're doing. They're completely separate from the Public Records Act, but they also involve document retention, but under different rules. The requests that people make have rules as well. They can request a lot, but there are also rules that they have to follow. The city has a guide called How to Make a Public Records Request. I brought a copy for everyone. We published it this year. It's on our website. Very quickly, the requester has to reasonably, specifically identify what it is that they want. Sometimes we get a request, I truly can't tell what they're asking for. I don't know what you want. I'm not sure what you're asking for. A request that's vague, overly broad, ambiguous, requires clarification. We go back to the requester and say, tell us more, tell us what you're actually looking for. You can't deny a public records request without giving someone the chance to clarify it. Fixed media includes your personal and work devices. Okay. So I know you have city laptops. If you're using, I don't know if you got city cell phones. Okay. So, and I know you have city email addresses. Whether or not you're using your email addresses, maybe you're using your personal addresses, email addresses, those are all subject to records requests. If it's on your personal phone, those text messages are subject to records requests. Work emails that you sent from your Gmail account, same as if you'd sent them from your city email account. That's why I really urge you to use your city email account. It's just so much more convenient, if nothing else. Yes, sir.
So my city laptop won't connect to my printer at work. I'll take it to work with me too.
Okay.
And can I forward something to my work email so I can print it?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Sure. I'm talking about actually drafting and sending emails. So this is usually a shock to people. People automatically think in their heads, well, if I send a text or an email on my personal phone or my personal Gmail account, that's not work. Yes, it is. You're exactly right. Yes, it is. How do we figure this out? Does it meet this very, very long definition? The content is what we analyze. It's highly fact specific. It changes all the time. It's hard to give you a really hard and fast rule because we're going to be analyzing document by document, request by request. But it's always very fact based, bigger picture analysis. Your obligations under the Public Records Act. This is what I call the phone call of sadness because I've had several of them in my time as the Public Records Chair. Get a request, comes to me. I call whoever it is in the city. Hi, this is Amy Huff. We got X request. Oh, well, I mean, is that, well, I mean, that's not a public record, is it? Yes, it is. Oh, I've had this call multiple times. Okay, I don't want to have it with any of you. These are the answers that are not acceptable responses to a records request. I didn't intend to create a public record. Intent to create a record or not part of the analysis. Didn't understand this would be a record. I think Delonte covered ignorance of the law. Although I also got that 16 miles an hour in Rocky River thing. I really did. It was also 16. Yeah. I am not comfortable providing this record. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. My files are not organized. It will take forever to find it. I don't have time to look for this. Stay organized. This isn't the real work that you're here to do. You're not here to fill public records requests. So make it easy on yourselves. Stay organized so that you can respond to them very quickly and keep moving on to the things that you're really here to do. Who wants it? Doesn't matter, yes.
The social media account.
Yeah. That's the whole question? Yeah.
Just about social media.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. People would be like not just posting, but like if some personally ends.
If you're making statements about work, yeah. Yeah. And this is, it's not a spoiler alert to say that what you guys are doing is intense work. There's a lot of emotion behind it. It's high profile. You've kind of got a couple of meetings. You're getting going here in earnest. Going to be a lot of records requests. There are going to be a lot of records requests for the work that you do, for your posts, for your emails. I will say, even though it's just us in this room, any really specific questions that you have about things that you've already done in the last couple of months, this actually is not an attorney-client privileged environment. We're being streamed right now. So those are conversations that we would have offline if you have really specific questions. But you can expect to get a ton of public records requests. So have that in your mind all the time.
We should not be deleting emails or texts.
Well, you can. You're allowed to, and I'll get to retention schedules in a minute, but there is no mandate that you hold on to texts or emails. I regularly delete my texts. Every 30 days, I delete my texts. You can do that too. That's a good idea to do that. I have been told that you can somehow have your phone auto delete texts. Okay, well, you can help people do that. I cannot figure that out.
It's too much.
Always remember though that there's someone on the other side of the text. So never, ever say, I never sent that text. Just don't do that. Who wants it? I think you said, sir, doesn't matter. You're completely right. Can't ask, doesn't matter. Why do they want it? Also irrelevant. And no, nobody's actually said this to me. I don't expect any of you will either, but it's obviously not on the table. These are examples to consider for you to get in the habit to start thinking about this, start having this mindset. Is this a public record? So, emails between you all about maybe bringing some food to the next one of these meetings. Public record? Yeah. Okay. How does that document what the police commission's doing?
Coming of our vision, yeah.
It's being paid.
Okay. Very good. And you could also argue opposite of that too, right? What would the anti-argument be to that? Right, got nothing to do with the police. I like your argument though that it's how you're spending the money. I think that's smart. These two are important to me because I hear them a lot. Emails about advice that you need from your attorney without copying your attorney on the emails. Don't do it. Don't do it. Emails. Like if you guys were going back and forth saying, God, we really need to ask Delante's advice about X. We really need to know, but Delante's not on the email. Those aren't privileged emails. Just you guys talking. That's not an attorney-client privileged communication. Corollary to that, do not send an email that says looping in law. Okay. And and tagging Delante or tagging me and thinking, oh, well, now this is a privileged email now, right? I've got a lawyer on it. It's attorney-client privilege. Doesn't work that way either. All of these things are always subject to what's called an in-camera review, which is a judge reviewing whatever we're asserting privilege on. They're going to review it, look at it, see if they agree. So we can say this is attorney-client privilege. There was a case a couple of years ago, probably 3 years ago now, where that was the assertion. Judge looked at it and said, we have 2 employees talking. There's a lawyer on the CC list, really not doing anything. Just there. And then 2 employees having a conversation. None of those are privileged. Those have to be produced. Personal notes taken during a meeting intended for your own use. Public record?
It depends on if they're your thoughts or you're just their director here.
You are allowed to take notes for your own use. Okay. You're allowed to write down, to remember what's going on, think things through for yourself. Where it changes is if you share your notes. Maybe someone's missing and you say, oh, well, I'll send you my notes from tonight. Then you're turning them into something that's more like minutes. And you see how the context is changing of it. And now it's just gone from your stream of consciousness to, well, here's what happened. Here's a documenting the business for that meeting. So if somebody's missed a meeting, honestly, catch up over the phone. unless it's your intent to be making meeting minutes and circulating them. But you are free to keep your own notes. Probably should keep your own notes to keep up with what's going on. I always keep them. I actually keep on within my files a file that's just called AKH notes. And all it is everything that I know is just an Amy note. Just stuff that I wrote down, meeting notes, thoughts, whatever that I know are not public records. And the name of the document is always like wherever I was, meeting with whoever, meeting on date. And that's the name of the document. I save them all in that folder. And I don't have to worry about, I don't have to analyze them really again because I know that I've saved them in my not a public record file. Draft statements to the media, public record?
Unless it's marked draft across it, like watermark draft.
Yeah, we make it public. If it's shared. If it's like you're doing on your own Google Drive as a single commissioner, once I think it's shared.
Yeah, once you, and even that I think is arguable that it's the minute you created it. Is it really just your own notes? I don't know. To draft is something to share publicly, it gets debatable. Certainly once you are sending it to other commissioners, the characters changed it. I can say that watermarks are not going to do anything for you in the analysis. There are, and this can get confusing, superseded drafts. Superseded drafts are not public records. What that usually means is very simply, all of us, you're working on a document, you saved it 2 hours later, you keep working on it, you're updating it, it's constantly changing, very simple concept. If I'm writing a motion, I don't have to produce all 10 versions that I went through while I wrote this thing, right? And you don't have to either. There can be debates about how complete a draft was at any given time. Again, it gets tricky, but simply labeling something a draft isn't the end of the analysis. That's mostly what I want you to take away from this. Yeah.
So you might have just answered this, but say we're discussing a statement to the media and different commissioners, like say 3 commissioners wrote separate drafts. All 3? Like we're trying to decide on which draft to use is what I'm saying. If all 3 become public record or the one that we agree on in the meeting. Right, yeah, that's right. That's why I say you may have already answered that.
Yeah. It doesn't need, there's always an instinct people have to feel like, well, the official thing is the public record. You know, the thing we put out there, the thing we used at the meeting, that's the official one, and it's not. It's really the thing you created and sent to another commission member. Really, it's when it leaves you, I think, is kind of the easiest, brightest line to think of, is when it left me. That's when it started to change character into possibly a public record. And there's, always further analysis, but that's when I would start to be thinking in your mind, this is no longer just my personal notes, because it's left me. Text messages.
Yes.
Is anybody surprised to learn that?
No.
No? Good.
The sigh was very informative.
Keep it in your mind all the time. write, email, text, tweet, post, all of it, like it will be one day read out loud to you at a deposition, sitting in front of a court reporter, having your words read back to you painfully. Right? You don't want that moment. Or quoted in the news. So I've watched as many of your meetings as I've been able to, and I've heard various commissioners talk about media training. Public records is media training. Because I've heard people that have addressed you say, be careful talking to the media. They can take like 4 seconds of what you said, twist it around. But wait till you see what they can do with your text messages and your emails, right? You're always thinking all the time, everything you write, no breaks. You're on duty all the time. There's just no informality in your role as a commissioner. Yes.
So if I have my work email, my city email, if I have like an Outlook app on my phone, does that make everything on my phone a public record or just things in the Outlook app?
I wouldn't even be talking about the app. It's things that are certainly your work address. Are you guys at clevelandohio.gov?
Yeah.
Okay, all your clevelandohio.gov.
Right, yeah.
If that's the only thing in that app,
right,
then
yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then for text messages, are text messages between two commissioners public records?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And would it be every text message you send with everybody or just those two commissioners or just you and other commissioners?
Well, it's you and other commissioners and you and anyone else that you talk about commission business with. So if you text a member of the media, if you text literally anyone and are talking about commission business. Because those are statements that you're making about how this commission works. So how to manage the records. Retention schedule, I would imagine that you don't have one. I know you're very early on making a lot of rules. The city has one. It's on the website. I think you can certainly use that. The Ohio Attorney General also has a sample model retention schedule. You can adopt that if you like. They're pretty close to saying the same thing. Our retention policy is posted on the web. If you want to have a different one, make sure it's on your website as well. The city in 2022 received 31,283 public records requests. Thank you. Yeah, it was staggering. 19,000 of those went to the Cleveland Police.
How many people are receiving that? How many people work on that?
Well, dedicated to the police team are probably 8 people dedicated to police and 5 people on my team, attorney reviews, but it's under 20 people that are full-time doing this. I know that on the police side, they all received challenge coins this year for 2022. For just that's 61% of the records went to them, and they have an amazing turnaround rate. The vast majority of media requests also relate to the police. Unsurprisingly, if they don't relate to the police, they're going to relate to nuisance abatement, lead in housing, economic development, aging, things like that. But far and away, the police are the most requested by everyone. And some of them are simple. Some of them are, I need my crime report to submit to Progressive or Geico. Easy enough. But a lot of them are complex. Organizing your records, organize them by topic, project, officer, meeting, committee. It is so worth it to stay organized from jump. I used to be very bad about just saving everything to my desktop or saving everything in documents. It is a nightmare when you're looking for something later. It's well worth your time to set up a file system now, however you want to do it. Committees you're on, case you're working on. When the records requests come in to us, they're going to come in something like, I want all the emails between the members of the Rules Committee. I want all the documents related to insert X incident. Things are going to come to us related to topic. We're not going to get a request that says, I want everything the commissioners said to each other on February 22nd. Unless something crazy happened on February 22nd, then we might. But in general, that's not how people think, and it's not how they request records. They're going to request by event or person or entity or committee. So organize your records that way too, because like you said, you really don't have time. It's not what you're here to do. Make it easy on yourself to respond to these requests. If a record's been requested, you cannot destroy it. You cannot delete it. It's been requested. I think Delonte covered that. I think you all know it. It really goes without saying. It's on the slide, so I'm going to say it. On to open meetings. 3 criteria for something to be an open meeting. A prearranged gathering by a majority of members. That number is 7. You all know that. Where you discuss or deliberate public business. I thought this looked a little bit like your conference room. That's why I picked it. Yeah. Okay, what is a prearranged gathering? What would you guys define a prearranged gathering as?
Like this, not like that.
Right.
I think it was like a conversation about an agreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Prior to 2016, I would have said pretty much the same thing. The Supreme Court came out with a case in 2016 that took a very expansive new definition of meetings that can include text messages. You can violate the Open Meetings Act if all 13 of you, or even 7 or 8 of you, are on a text chain together. So just don't have a group. Do not have 7 of you on a text chain. Do not have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 of you on a text chain. Don't have an entire committee on a text chain. And we can talk about these things offline, but just it's a weird case. So it's a school board. I'll tell you the facts of it. Maybe it'll help a little bit. It's weird, right? It's just not how. School board case, a lot of open meetings, case law comes from school boards. School board member thought that 2 employees were stealing. He did his own investigation, found that to be the case. These 2 employees had to pay back the money. They were improperly reimbursing themselves. They had to pay back the money. The school board then enacted a rule saying that the rest of the school board, there were 5 members. The other 4 then enacted a rule saying, you know what? School board members are no longer allowed to speak to staff. You can only speak to the superintendent or the treasurer, and they will speak to staff. And they put up a wall. Right. So it becomes a whole thing. It's down near Columbus. It's quite a brouhaha in Columbus. And the local paper praises the one guy who did this investigation, got these guys that were stealing and made them pay it back, and really chastises the rest of the school board for trying to interfere with this. Openly trying to interfere with this and making it harder. The president of the school board starts an email chain that eventually gets pretty much everyone. The other 4 people, the superintendent gets on it. Quite a few people end up on this, where he organizes the response that they're going to take to this editorial to pretty much trash them. This gets held to be ultimately an open meeting. Even though it's an email chain, it turns into a prearranged gathering. They're all jumping on it, continuing to come back to it, adding things to this response that they're going to make. This is the language that comes out of the decision. Whether it occurs face-to-face, telephonically, by video conference, electronically, email, text, tweet, or other form of communication. It freaked out a lot of lawyers, I will say. It's a hard definition to live with. So all I can say to you is keep all 13 of you off of a text chain. Don't even put 7 of you on a text chain, and don't put an entire subcommittee on a text chain.
Wait a minute. But this is only to discuss public business, right? Like if I want to invite all of them to my house for a potluck, so we can get to know each other better. No talking about business.
I really would tell you not to do it.
Prearranged meeting. We don't even know each other.
Well, you don't know each other, and we want you to get to know each other, right?
In public.
But just be smart in how you schedule it, right? You can text each other 2 at a time.
But could we all go to the potluck together? No.
Yeah.
You can't be 13 of you together is an open meeting. And this is, 1 second, please. This is not a normal situation where normally you would want to get together, have a barbecue, get to know each other, bond, right? This is a weird situation. That's an open meeting. So unless you want to throw open your house, give notice, and let people come in, right? You can't do it. You can meet in smaller groups and get to know each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
6 or less.
Committees, not in a committee.
Not in a committee, right?
So basically, we have to.
So the email chain thing, so what if we wanted to kind of document together, that would essentially become what you're saying is that would be a public meeting. If we were gonna put out a statement and work on it by email.
I'm saying that it could be, and let me jump forward a little bit, because the overarching idea of all of it is be extremely careful how you deliberate and discuss, especially as you are getting to know each other and you are out and about. Even if there were 6 of you at somebody's house, you're going to talk about work. This is essentially your work. It's what you have in common. Going to talk about it. You have to be really careful in how you deliberate and discuss things. Ohio really strongly favors access and transparency for citizens. And it strongly disfavors any kind of behind the scenes, behind closed doors, behind the scenes. Citizen can't tell what the discussion was. That's what's driving all of these decisions. So have that be the overarching idea in your head of what you're trying to avoid.
So I'm sorry. So we cannot. So on email, we can't work on things via email as a group, because even if it's subject to Open Meetings Act, does that mean we can't do it, or does that mean that one day someone is just gonna pull the records of it, or is it that we actually cannot work together?
Well, all of your emails are public records.
Yeah.
Right? Full on. Your deliberation should be done in public at your meetings. I know, yeah.
Oh.
And can I just say, it sounds like a lot, but it gets done all the time. So like right now it sounds overwhelming, but council does it, other commissions do it. So it's not as impractical as it sounds. Like for instance, today when I shared the rules, right? I just made a note in there. You can't comment to each other on these rules in this email chain, right? So I'm sharing a document that you're going to consider like it's a legislation in council. Like you just can't have that conversation in there. It doesn't mean you can't call each other one-on-one and have a conversation about it, or even have a group of 3 people talk about it. But you just can't have that conversation in email because that's a convenience thing. So it's not as unwieldy as it sounds in reality.
Thank you. Yeah. No, that's important. Thank you for saying that. If you can talk to each other. All right, you really can. You can talk to each other. But you do have to start getting used to this mindset. More than anything, adopt the mindset. You have to be on guard all the time for how you deliberate. Make sure that you're not accidentally having a meeting. Deliberate or discuss, like I was just saying, needs to be in person. What does it even mean? Deliberate generally means to weigh or examine the reasons for or against a choice. Discuss, exchange words, comments, or ideas. A little bit of an exception for fact finding. If you guys just go on a tour of something, right? You're just fact finding. You're not doing anything. You're getting some information, not asking questions. You're not discussing anything. You're not making any decisions. Fine. That's not discussion and deliberation. And you'll probably do some of that. Okay. Subject to the Open Meetings Act. A community meet and greet where maybe you go to the 5th district and meet citizens. Open meeting?
Yeah.
I think you're right, but I think you could also argue that you're not really making any decisions, just standing around introducing each other. That would be the counter argument to that.
But if it's a community, it's public anyway.
It is public anyways, but what are you deliberating?
No.
You see how exhausting it is, right? Yeah. Subcommittees, obviously. Workshops, retreats, a meeting by any other name, right? Doesn't matter. I think city council right now is having its 2-week budget marathon. They technically call it a retreat. The worst retreat in history. Yeah.
That's live streamed.
Completely, yeah. A press conference. You think you have to give people notice of what time and place you're having a press conference? Well, are you doing that because you're deliberating, or are you doing that because you want the attention of people coming to your press conference? Right. It's not because you're deliberating and making a decision. It's because you want people to come to your press conference and hear what you have to say, right? Yeah, I don't think that's an open meeting. There's case law that that's not an open meeting. Tour of the county jail? I would say so, yes.
But there was a recent situation with the aircraft building where the media was kicked out of that.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a resolved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would call that unresolved. That is the argument. And the argument I would be making there is that that was people wandering around looking at a building.
Those are probably not wise to kick people out.
Amy, question.
Yeah.
Is there any part of or at the county jail that might affect the confidentiality of the inmates if you're going in those areas?
I'm not sure what area.
Public.
I don't know what area you would like into that would be.
Because we've been in some before where you're in group settings.
Right.
You know, when you're going in to do a program or whatever. But I just wondered if there's any restriction as far as the confidentiality of the inmates.
I don't know. I really think that's pretty specific. Something I would really specifically ask at the time of the tour. It's a good question. I don't know. Text messages, we've talked about, emails, it's tricky. A series of back-to-back meetings of a non-majority, several cases about this where a non-majority met, sort of a group of people met at 3, and then a subgroup met at 3:30, and then a group met at 4. Back to back to back to back.
Sequential meetings is mentioned.
It's just, it's too cute. By half, you can't, yeah. Yeah.
Have the barbecue that way.
The duties of an open meeting are very straightforward. Notice, openness, and minutes. I looked at the minutes for the January, I think it was January 25th meeting. They were very nice. I don't know who did those, but they looked good to me. They're nice, thorough. They don't need to be a transcript. Hannah did them. Okay. They don't have to be a transcript. They need to basically give a person who wasn't there an idea of what happened and why. So basically, a person who missed the meeting has an idea what happened and what their rationale was. They need to be prepared, filed, and made available promptly. You guys are off to a really good start on that.
Because when I was a few days ago, I even saw like the civilian police report. Like they have virtual meetings. Can we have virtual meetings? And what is the rules around that?
Well, we're a charter city, so we are allowed to have virtual meetings. The state of Ohio doesn't allow them anymore. They had a COVID exception that's gone. So you are considered present if you appear virtually. I more would say just digital divide wise, if you're having virtual meetings, there are people that can't come.
Is the city working on a new policy around the?
I don't know.
Didn't that come up in our rules committee?
What?
That wasn't, isn't there, are we waiting to find out?
I don't have a copy, so the last thing is referenced that there is a home rule, council passed something related to continuing, allowing virtual meetings.
Right.
Even though, the Ohio Attorney General had said all meetings have to return live. I've not received a copy of that yet to see it, so I don't know the specifics of it, so I can't comment on the specifics. So that's what I was referring to when I said that. I know it exists. Delante said we have a home rule on that goes above the state law, but I have not seen. So I just recommend right now we do what we're doing without crossing into the virtual meetings, because even the ones that still are like Civilian Police Review Board, they're arguing about getting back in person as soon as possible because the demand is there.
Yeah, it does exist. I've seen it. I would have brought it tonight. I didn't know you were looking for it. Yeah, the state of Ohio says no more virtual meetings. We have a charter. We can make our own rule about that. We haven't acted an ordinance that we can keep doing them. Again, it becomes an access issue with people being able to attend them. But you yourselves will be marked present as commissioners if you were to Zoom in, or just do sort of a hybrid meeting. Executive sessions. There are only 8 reasons you can ever go into one. I have my caution sign here because they're tricky. You can mess them up easily. You have to be specific and say one of the 8 reasons why you're going into an executive session. Can't go outside of the 8. You can bring someone into executive session with you only if that person is related to the reason you're in there. Easy example, personnel. Interviewing a job candidate. We're going into executive session to interview this job candidate. You can invite that candidate in your executive session and interview them. Confidentiality, I think Delonte said this, the records in the executive session are not confidential. Just because the session doesn't extend to the records. The minutes, your main meeting minutes, need to reflect. We went into executive session to discuss hiring whoever or whatever it is you went for. Never vote in executive session. Don't indicate how you're going to vote when you come back. I've seen that happen as well. Don't talk about it and indicate, well, when we go back on the record, I really like so-and-so. Always end every meeting in open session. Don't be in an executive session and call it a night and turn off the lights. When you're in, this is why I really say use executive sessions sparingly. Once you're in it, the burden is on you to show you correctly used it. If somebody acknowledges it, it's your burden to demonstrate that you correctly invoked it for a permissible reason, followed all the rules, did everything right. And that's a burden that you're taking on. So I would take it on sparingly and when you really feel it's necessary. All 8 reasons are listed in 121.22G.
And that's the Ohio Revised Code or the same Revised Code?
Ohio Revised Code. I spared you a slide listing out all 8 of them.
Are they
Okay.
long too?
I'm sorry, what?
Can we just go over them really quickly, or is it very long?
It is long. I can email you. There's of the 8, there are like 2, whatever they apply to you. Personnel issues, imminent or pending litigation. Not, I think we might get sued for this, but like, yeah, we're about to get sued. Or we're being sued, something like that. No. Look at you, wake up. You're like, the protocol for them. I brought this presentation. I can also email it to you. Begin an open session. Somebody makes a motion on the record to move into executive session. Somebody seconds it. Say the exact reason. There's case law where somebody said, we're moving into executive session. I move for a personnel matter. Too vague. I can send you all. I actually have a, I call it the executive session recipe of, do this and then this and then this and say it this way so that you can't really go wrong. Say specifically what you're going into the session for. Do a roll call voice vote, not a show of hands. A majority of a quorum, that's 4 of you, agree. Motion and vote recorded in the meeting minutes. Return to the open meeting and clearly state, we are now back on the record. Make it very clear. Then you can have your discussion, deliberations, make any decisions you want. You don't need to take any minutes in an executive session, and if you do, they're public record. Again, I would not advise this. That's the reason you went into an executive session. You're really undermining yourself.
Only 4 of us is needed for a quorum?
Majority of.
Majority of the board.
Four out
So
of 7.
4 out of 7.
Go to executive session.
The penalties for violating the OMA are very, very steep. Invalidity, your decisions will be unmade. It's a tremendous amount of work. I've read a lot of cases where for violating any of these, improper notice, improper deliberation, the decision is unmade. You've terminated someone's employment? No, you have not. You've had this meeting? No, you have not. Do it again. Start at the top. So it really requires close attention because the stakes of not following this are very high, all the work you're doing. In addition to the invalidity risks, there's a mandatory civil forfeiture for each violation of $500, an injunction from the court, meaning that the board of the commission will be ordered either to do something or not do something. For instance, ordered to have the meeting again, correct whatever, cure whatever the violation was. There's also something called a quo warranto action. Not a lot of them, but it has happened. Can only be brought by our county prosecutor or the Ohio Attorney General. This is for frequent flyers who continue to violate the Open Meetings Act after being told they can be removed. So an individual commissioner who just will not follow the law could be removed from the commission only by the county prosecutor or the AG. Very uncommon. I've only seen a couple of cases about it, but it is out there. I always think about and remember when these cases are lost, it's all taxpayer money. All of this, the damages, civil forfeitures, all taxpayer money. And it's an incredibly bad use of taxpayer money. Public Records Act, there are statutory damages of $100 a day for each date from the date a mandamus claim is what's filed when someone's records haven't been turned over. Those are capped at $1,000. Attorney's fees are payable in either one of these scenarios, and those can really run up. Finally, reputational damage is really incalculable. The damage to your credibility, the guess you're not so transparent after all damage, really hard to recover from and hard to calculate. Court costs can also be awarded if there's a writ of mandamus. None of these damages are considered punitive. They're real. Anything, any questions? No? Are you sufficiently terrified of these laws?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you still have the rest of this meeting to go. You're not even done yet. You guys are. All right. All right. Well, thank you for your thank you for your attention. Thank you. And then write your ass.
Corey's making red beans and rice this weekend with sausage and ham hocks.
I'm coming over to unofficial, not in play.
I'm officially very hungry.
Thank you so much. All right. Everybody turn your
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So we need to.
I'm so hungry.
Somebody to say something. We were starting the session.
Supposed to be
No, no,
dismissed.
this is our,
I think we should have a motion for that.
So what?
Well, we just did.
Alana has the open meeting.
Yeah. Okay, so I thought
Official training, I would say the official training is done and now.
we should say something about motion to,
For
I don't know,
the.
just to get the side.
No, you're not supposed to be here. This is a.
No, everyone who is not part of the committee can go once the training's over.
Right.
And you dismissed the training has commenced. And yes, this is technically a committee meeting and you all were just sitting in for training.
Just want to make sure we were.
No, the committee has to be formally adjourned, but the training is over. And,
Let's take it with us.
So I guess,
Good luck, guys.
I have it on digital.
Yeah, is somebody left just the training committee?
They're on their way.
See somebody tomorrow. For budget?
oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I believe we have an update, meeting. I just, hard to read that. All right. Thank you guys.
All right. Be safe.
Goodbye.
We'll be right behind you.
All right. I don't know if we have to wait for you. And so just other people so that the meeting can fit in. Like
Yeah.
if somebody wants to be.
No.
Okay. So, hi. We are now in new business. Is there any are there any motions on the floor? We're now in new business.
Motion that we, make a motion that we table this to the next meeting. Reschedule. That's what I want to
Do
say.
you have a date? Or
We don't already have a date for next week.
the
We don't.
Interim training, this has nothing scheduled beyond this. We can do doodle, yes.
You can do what we did for the budget. What we did was someone, I think, created a goal, they get or something. And they do something like that, and we were able to set it up.
I just thought it was we need the opposite of
The opposite would be the main piece, so we didn't do the opposite, set an actual system thing. We just said the opposite, we set a big.
I mean, want to do Wednesdays.
Is that what first one?
so what's your motion?
So, a motion that we reschedule, holding new business, or what, 2 weeks from today?
That's March. What's that? It's the week after February, March 1st.
Okay. I make a motion that we reschedule holding new business for March 2nd.
Okay.
Oh, she said March 1st, sorry. March 1st.
Wednesday, March.
Do you guys think that's too long to schedule more training?
Well, we do have another training next Wednesday. Yeah, it is.
Okay, so there's some.
Yeah, it's an hour before, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what the full
Yeah, the
commission.
first is
So I motion that we reschedule old and new business with the training committee to March 1st.
all right. I'll read the roll call. Greg Reeves,
Aye.
James Truro,
Here, I.
Karina Zayed, John,
Yeah, yeah.
okay. John Adams,
Aye.
Alana Gary Ferguson. So that motion is, and then we need, I guess, one more motion.
Go right. Have motion to adjourn the meeting.
Any second? Read the roll is Greg Reeves,
Aye.
James Shura,
Aye.
Sharina Zayed,
Aye.
John Adams,
Aye.
and Alana Gary Ferguson. Meeting is adjourned.
Adjourned at 8:45 p.m.
Adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. And you'll be on camera for about 30 more seconds. There's a little delay to it.
All right. We get out of here.